This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL Coveel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. So today on the show, I have Mark Melin. Mark is what I will affectionately call a managed futures expert. He is also an editor-writer at Opalesque and has written 3 books. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Good to see you again.
Absolutely. The last time we connected, we were in San Diego in some hotel chatting. I don't know what we were talking about. I think you were trying to tell me that long-term capital management was still a decent investing.
That was not the conversation. We're talking about a short volatility strategy. I'm not going to defend long-term capital management. So that's like defending John Corzine. No, thank you.
Well, you bring it right up. So let me give my view on this. So Mark, I want the audience to understand, Mark, and he's going to explain this to us, has really put himself into a position of being almost the investigative reporter for everything that's happened with MF Global. So we'll talk about some of his other stuff as we go on here. But I really think from the ground up, I think, Mark, you could do a great education to just pretend I'm the guy that doesn't know anything. I've got an E-Trade account or a Schwab account, and I hear this story of MF Global and futures in Chicago, and that doesn't affect me. Start me, because you've really, and then you're going to tell me about this, but you've really had a chance to get under the hood. And I think you could probably explain this thing and start easy on us. Don't go all jargon on me. Help the little guy that doesn't get this and walk us through what's going on, what's happened. What the heck is MF Global?
Okay. First, let me just start with a real simple story, Michael. Imagine that the money that you had in a bank account was transferred out of that bank account. And the way this happened is the president of the bank ordered the tellers to transfer the money. You went into your account, you wanted to take your money out, you realize the money's gone. Sorry, no insurance. Later. That's what happened with MF Global. Now, here's the sticky part. In my opinion, when the police come to investigate the bank robbery, they question the tellers. They don't question the bank president. That, in my opinion, is what needs investigation. And if you start to look at what's happening on Congress, they're calling for an investigation. I said it 3 months ago on Santelli's show. This is Watergate, okay? And there's a political cover-up behind this. There has been, in my opinion, fraud perpetrated. Criminality has occurred, and it has damaged the integrity of the markets. So that's the short story. How's that?
Well, I tell you what, do some backfill now. I mean, take us back to, because I know, and even if, I know for maybe some folks that might seem a little too boring to get detailed, but when you say, okay, and I assume we're talking about John Corzine, who was the president of MF Global, and you're essentially saying let's say I'm Mike Covel and I had an account with MF Global, that he essentially ordered money that was all these segregated accounts, correct?
Correct.
And he just ordered this move to where?
Counterparties. There was a handful of transactions said to be. So there were maybe 5-6 transactions that went to key counterparties, one of them being JP Morgan, and then a number of other counterparties moved it over to London where it's difficult to access. So essentially, during the final week, and here's another interesting story, during the final week, customers are asking for their money back, and they get sent checks which bounce, but these counterparties get sent wire transfers, okay? That takes planning. It's one of the absurdities of MF Global is the back office is being constantly blamed. Oh, they're bungling, they're idiots. That, oh, whoops, we sent checks to customers and wires to counterparties. Oh, those bungling back office idiots. I mean, it's just absurd. They early in this case, they claimed that money had vaporized. I mean, please, do they think that we're stupid? I actually wrote an article about that. Do they think we're stupid? And it just outlined the absurdity of this entire situation.
So essentially, you're telling me that, and I'm playing a novice here. You're saying, okay, this bank, this brokerage firm, MF Global, I assume they had debts they couldn't pay, so they basically reached in and took money from client accounts to pay their debts?
That's essentially it, yes. And then another component in terms of the illegality, when they paid those debts to the counterparties, there were segregation reports that they were supposed to have filed with regulators. So here regulators are sitting in MF Global paying rapt attention to these reports that are coming to them, and the reports are fraudulently display incorrect seg funds reports and shows that the money is there when in fact the money had been transferred. That's according to congressional testimony.
Well, here's where I'm coming from. It's like, what is this relegated or limited to this one obscure sounding brokerage bank, MF Global, or is this something that, from your perspective, could happen to anybody?
Oh, Michael, you just hit the nail on the head. This can happen to anyone. Okay, what we're seeing right now is a degradation of criminality and essentially, in my opinion, and I've said this on TV before, making fraud legal. So where do we stop from here? If someone can essentially rob money from a segregated account and then not be investigated, where does this end? What's next? A 401k? You don't know where the future is going to go. But I can tell you right now, the path we're on, if people don't stand up to John Corzine, the path we're on is just going to continue to get worse. And that's why I'm sort of gratified because Congress is now calling for an independent prosecutor. And once you start to understand the political angles of this story, you understand why an independent prosecutor, in my opinion, is absolutely required.
Okay, Mark, here's where I think maybe some folks like myself are not understanding. So there's a Nordstrom's up the street. So I can walk over to the mall and I can walk into Nordstrom's and I could pick up a shirt off the rack. Maybe it's a couple $100 shirt, and I could put it on and go try running out the door. And more than likely, if someone sees me do it, they're going to call the cops, they're going to put handcuffs on me, and they're going to say, you just stole something, you're going to jail. How is that part of basic law and order not taking place here? What am I missing?
Okay, you're missing the political dynamic, okay? Because let's say you're the guy running out of the store, and your best friend is the mayor of the town. The mayor of the town gives a call to the police chief and says, do not enforce the law on this individual. Now, the police chief, and I'm using an analogy here with MF Global, the police chief is a little upset about that. He says the law is being ignored, and so there you have your political cover-up.
Okay, if I look back to everything that's taken place since 2008, at least in my stomach, I have a hard time seeing that there didn't seem to be a bipartisan effort to, for example, support the bank bailouts. And it seemed like the effort was really, I had a hard time picking on one party or another. They both seem to have the equal number of people embedded at Goldman Sachs. So who is John Corzine's protector?
Well, That goes a long way. He actually has a number of enemies and protectors on Wall Street. He worked at Goldman Sachs, and he and Gary Gensler worked together at Goldman Sachs.
Hold on, Gary Gensler is, let's let everybody know,
the CFTC commissioner.
Right.
Yeah, this is called foreshadowing, Michael. The CFTC commissioner, who is in charge of the CFTC, is one of the agencies in charge of regulating Mr. Corzine and MF Global. Mr. Gensler worked through November 3rd, and that's an important date to note. So he was in charge of what occurred at MF Global until November 3rd. Then he turned the matter over to CFTC Commissioner Jill Summers, who took responsibility after November 3rd. So just some important dates to keep in mind.
Okay, so once again, Corzine does this. He essentially, and I think everybody out there can understand this. Okay, let's say you've got, maybe you've got $5,000 at a Bank of America checking account. And just imagine if you woke up the next day and you found out that the president of Bank of America ordered your money transferred to an international bank overseas. So your first thought would be, okay, that's illegal.
Give me my money back.
Right, I'm still trying to understand. That's
the absurdity.
Okay, but who is specifically not ordering the handcuffs to be put on somebody at MF Global? Who is specifically not doing that? Who's not doing their job?
Okay, well, again, I'm going to base my speculation on publicly available documents. So, and you have to be very careful when you do something along these lines, okay? Based on the publicly available documents, we know that the trustee's office, run by Louis Freeh, controls the information on MF Global. He had all the secret information, all the emails, all the records. So he's controlling this information.
Hold on, you said Louis Freeh. This is former head of the FBI?
Former head of the FBI.
And what does he do now?
He is the bankruptcy trustee,
okay,
which is a little unusual. He has never managed a bankruptcy before, and he has a four-person law firm. As a matter of fact, I had a Twitter exchange with Diane from the New York Times, who wrote a book on Madoff, and I told her, I said, he has a four-person law firm, and he's running this bankruptcy, and she even said that's highly unusual. So the fact he has this job, which is potentially going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in legal fees, and he's already done some interesting maneuvers where he's hired his own firm to do investigations. So there's been a number of interesting things. But anyway, he controls the information. Now, the Department of Justice, under which the FBI is located, is relying on Freeh for information, I am told. So that's not a documented fact. I've been told that by multiple sources. Then the Department of Justice relies on the CFTC, which is run by Gary Gensler, to pass an order down to the Department of Justice to investigate. And the CFTC, it's also important to note, is supposed to be passing a file from the D.C. office to the New York office to instigate an investigation in Mr. Corzine. And this did not happen as of March 28th when I was down in D.C. It still hadn't happened as of that date, we learned in congressional testimony. So here the leading criminal isn't investigated, and you can kind of understand the dynamics. I've spoken with career regulators and career law enforcement, and they are chomping their teeth to get into Corzine. I mean, what's happening here is not any indication of the career people that are working there. It's the political level. Gary Gensler's a Democrat. Obama administration. Corzine is still bundling money for the Obama administration. Why that's allowed to happen is just beyond comprehension. I don't get it.
Here's what I don't understand. I wouldn't it be politically smart for the president of the United States if there is a major fraud? You have probably, I'm assuming that there is probably, just the way the country is divided, that maybe there's an equal number of Democrats and Republicans that got screwed over at MF Global. So I'm surprised that the president doesn't see it as an opportunity to put his foot down and say, enough, let's get this taken care of. Why would he not want to do that?
Okay, there is a great documentary that just occurred asking those same questions. Barack Obama came to office with a reform-minded view of Wall Street. He was talking to Paul Volcker, the perfect guy to be Treasury Secretary, to get a level playing field in Wall Street. And essentially, he went with Tim Geithner, another working group member. I'm going to get into a little weeds here. There's a group in D.C. called the Working Group that essentially started by ousting Brooksley Born as CFTC chairman in 1999 because she exposed the lack of transparency in mortgage derivatives. So this group has been essentially, in my opinion, doing things that have damaged markets. I think not having transparency is not a positive thing. If you look at the regulated markets, they have transparency. There's risk disclosure. And I know you and I, Michael, have had these conversations before, but you know I'm a proponent of transparency and risk disclosure. And, you know, if you look at the OTC market, which is kind of where the battleground is now, you know, part of what happened with MF Global is, as a byproduct, I'm not saying this was planned, but as a byproduct, the regulated derivatives markets have been damaged. And now, as we look to regulate OTC, you know, there's a good case to be made that they might not use the regulated derivatives markets, which I think it'd be a shame, because the regulated derivatives markets have the structure, they have the capacity. And you know, I think at the end of the day, mark my words on this, and I want to say this right now, timestamp, I think justice will be served. I really do. And I believe the investor protections that are built into the existing segregated account structure in the commodity industry might have a couple problems, but by and large, they work. And I think that's going to be proven out in this MF Global situation.
Well, let me put my hat on the other side of the equation. So we just make the case, or you connect some dots, and you say, well, you know, John Corzine is a Democrat, and John Corzine has had, you know, obviously he was a United States Senator at one point in time, and he's still, as you mentioned, raising money, which I think it's not an opinion, it's a fact, for the Obama, I assume, re-election campaign. So here's where I don't get. So okay, those are just some facts sitting over here to the left-hand side of the ledger. Now, on the right-hand side of the ledger, there's another political party called the Republicans. Why is that group of people not up in arms? Why are, okay. What's going on there? Because if this is one side of the ledger that currently Corzine Obama, why is the other side not complaining? I don't get it.
Actually, all right, here's the amazing thing from a political standpoint. The Tea Party guys love this MF Global. This MF Global, the Tea Party guys want fairness. They don't want to give. They don't want government to back an industry. Remember having this conversation when I was in San Diego with you? Yeah. You know, so the Tea Party guys have actually gotten behind MF Global, and there's a guy named Congressman Grimm who is right now going around Congress and trying to get a special prosecutor to investigate the MF Global crimes.
Okay, but I don't know hold on, Mark. Who's Congressman Grimm? What about Bonnier? Where's the speaker? I don't get it. Why are the higher levels not making this primetime news that you see on Fox? I don't get it. Why is this buried on the right too? And it seems to be buried because it's not on it's on your radar screen because you're in the middle of it. You're like an investigative reporter. It's like, you know, MF Global's version of Woodward and Bernstein. You're right there. But what's going on with the upper reaches of the right? Why are they not complaining? I don't know who Grimm is. I
can only speculate, and I'll just throw a couple items on the table for you, Michael. Some people view going after John Corzine as potentially harming Wall Street or going after a Wall Street guy, which I don't think is the case. I think this actually, if justice is done with what has occurred here, I think it shows that the system does work. And, you know, if an investigation, a real investigation of Mr. Corzine and his activities does not take place, I think you're handing Occupy Wall Street a bullet, quite frankly, because this is a damning indictment of the system if this clear fraud is not investigated. And whatever they decide, I am of the opinion that whatever they decide, you know, let the NFA get their shot in, let the CFTC get their shot in, and whatever happens as a result of those guys doing their best, I am good with that. Even if it means Corzine doesn't go to jail, but at least give the people who understand this industry the shot to bring justice and support the investor protections that are built in to this industry.
Okay, Mark, listen. What's really going on with this whole thing? What's really going on? I want to know the inside scoop.
What did I do? I didn't just tell you the inside scoop.
I want the inside scoop. What's going on? The guy steals money, or his underlings steal money, and no one's had handcuffs put on him. And both sides seem to be avoiding this. So my question is, what potentially is the larger issue? And did you just hint at this? Is it ultimately that the system is so broken that what we're really seeing with the Corzine case is that Wall Street controls Congress?
Oh, well, yeah, that's a fact. Okay. And I'm not going to be the first one to say that. I mean, Frontline, I'm going to send you a link to this Frontline documentary. I mean, it's
I've watched that. That's great. It's great.
Oh, isn't it amazing?
Yeah, it's fantastic.
They control Congress, and they're creeping into the regulators. Now, I'm going to give an opinion based on, I don't want to get in the weeds on all the stories of the SEC document scandals and the things that are documented that lead me to question the SEC. But in my opinion, the SEC appears as though it's a captured regulator. Now, the banks are, in my opinion, running roughshod over the SEC. And that's evident in that SEC document scandal. MF Global had a bond offering, actually 2 bond offerings in the summer, August 2nd. And there was this annual audit report that essentially disclosed the fact that MF Global had all the risk associated with this European sovereign debt trade assigned to the FCM, and all the reward going over to London. Now, this was critical risk disclosure that the SEC apparently withheld on the server and time-stamped it differently. Initially, they put a timestamp on it saying that they received the document after the bond offering, but in fact, they corrected themselves and saw it before the bond offering. Now, what's interesting with this whole document scandal is I've confirmed it with the SEC. I have in writing from the SEC, and I submitted this information to Congress, and that's where I first ran into Congressman Grimm. I'm going to tell you something. In my opinion, Congressman Grimm knows what he's doing. He's a former FBI guy, investigated financial crimes. He looked at this SEC document scandal. He knew right away that this was material risk disclosure and that the SEC had to do some answering. Now, the SEC is also involved in another play that had damaged MF Global customers. They did not consult the CFTC or the NFA during the bankruptcy process. And that was key. When this event went into a Chapter 11 reorganization, they're doing a lot of reorganizing, it changed the dynamic. The Chapter 7 is the appropriate method, I've been told, by legal sources. And the Chapter 7 has provisions written into the Commodity Exchange Act. So there's a legal link between the Chapter 7 bankruptcy and the Commodity Exchange Act. There is no legal link between Chapter 11 and the Commodity Exchange Act. So it should have gone to a Chapter 7, but the SEC let it go to a SIPC Chapter 11 liquidation. Grimm's all over that. And then just what hasn't been really gone into in the media is just the level of they falsified or they're accused of having falsified documents to regulators in the final 2 days. And what you get this line from the media that was so chaotic and money vaporized, and here's the story. There were a handful of money transfers that were illegal. And you just need to focus on those. And segregated reports were said to have been falsified that masked these transactions going to counterparties. That's the key.
Mark, it seems like to me that somebody has put an order out to stand down. Media, stand down. Politicians, stand down. Because I think if the general public understood the risk, and I think it's a fairly new risk, the risk of your money being stolen. I mean, the entire trust connection between an individual and their bank has been broken with this episode unless they clear it up quickly and there's full disclosure and transparency, which there has not been. So why does it feel like there's been this stand down order? Because we're talking about the politicians and they don't seem to be doing much. Law enforcement's not making arrests. And I know there's been the requisite number of articles, but why is there not? Where is the passionate media people digging into this? I don't get it. Where are they? Why are they standing down?
I know a fair amount of these guys, and I've got to tell you, there are some really great journalists on this story. But having said that, why this isn't on the front page is beyond me. And, the journalists have to be careful. Some of where this story goes damages the pillars of some of the counterparties, namely J.P. Morgan. So I know everyone has to be careful, including myself. You don't want to destroy the foundation of the economy or the foundation of regulators. So I know people are careful on one hand, but on the other hand, this is an amazing.
But how do you destroy it if we're sitting at what looks to be the destruction?
Well, yeah, but I think quite frankly, here's how this whole situation can be resolved. You have to turn a ship around. You don't want to scuttle the ship. So right now what we're doing, MF Global and John Corzine, the ship's being turned around, okay? We're going to say, okay, we now recognize what is going on. We're going to have to play by the rules. And, the government is there to enforce the rules, not necessarily pick a side. Because that's really what's occurred, Michael. And if you go back to the conversation you and I had, I think it was in October, we were talking about socialized government and government picking winners and losers. And at the time, I remember thinking to myself when you and I had that conversation, that seems like such a absurd thought because that can't be happening. I know that they get a bailout, but how deeply they are in bed with the big banks is really interesting. I think it's starting to become questioned too, because with the European sovereign debt situation, and this is another fascinating topic, we talked about this, with the European sovereign debt situation, there's a good case to be made that these too big to fail banks are going to require a bailout. So
you bring up that issue, and we talked about this Frontline special, and if anyone hasn't seen it, go to PBS. I think it's called like Money, Wall Street Power or something. Many episodes. Check it out. I saw the most recent episode. I think it was on May 1st, and two things struck me in there. First, Robert Reich, who I never ever recalled sharing kind of a common view with Mr. Reich over the years. I sat there the other night and Bob Reich is saying, how did we do all these bailouts and not have one condition placed on a bank? And I'm like, damn, Bob, that's a really good question. And I'm like, okay.
Look what happened to GM. GM had they went in and managed GM.
But what I'm trying to paint out to people is that, this whole idea of right and left politics is so murky. Because here I have somebody on the left, Democrat Bob Reich, who, for all intents and purposes, to me, has sounded like, a socialist for 15 or 20 years. He's been in the public eye. And then I hear him on this PBS special, and he's asking the question that I would most ask. And I'm thinking, upside down, turned around. And then the second aspect of that Frontline special, and maybe you can comment on this too, was apparently once Obama got into office, the ongoing debate, and I know I'm going to simplify this a little, but the debate between Geithner and Summers. And basically, Summers said, you know what? These things are too big. We got to break them up. Talking about Citi, Bank of America.
Right.
Let's pull the Band-Aid off. And Geithner basically was like, nope, can't do it. It'll roil the markets, da-da-da-da-da. And I thought to myself, somebody might say, well, that was just Tim Geithner's opinion, and Larry Summers had a different opinion. And then, of course, the media will say, well, look what's happened since. Geithner was right, da-da-da-da-da. I actually think Geithner just kicked the can down the road. But the real issue that maybe if you really want to analyze why someone like Geithner made that decision, he was 47 years old. If he would have made the decision that Summers wanted to make, we all know what would have happened to the markets at that point in time. And Tim might not have never had a job again in public finance or public anything. So yeah. I maybe you can comment on that Geithner-Summers debate. Now, for those listening, this would be two very high-level Democrats having this debate, a very clear debate.
Okay, and you know what's interesting about this? Let me point out that I think once people understand the concepts at a basic level, everyone agrees.
Yeah.
The Tea Party agrees with Occupy Wall Street, that essentially these banks should not be given a guarantee on their risky trades, and they have some risky trades on. So with that said, let's frame the Summers-Geithner debate, because Geithner comes from a group that essentially has institutionalized the concept that certain companies receive favored treatment over other companies. And not only that, but we guarantee them against loss. So they're taking massive bets. If you look at some of the bets some of these banks have, Michael, you're familiar with trend trading. I'm going to tell you right now, these guys are over leveraged. Their margin to equity usage is way out of line, in my opinion, and they are overexposed to economic prosperity. Okay, so anyway, that's where it is now. And then Summers and Geithner. Summers says, hey, look, we shouldn't be bailing people out. We shouldn't be giving people umbrage from their risk. They should take their own risk. And here's Geithner saying, well, no. This will roil the market. And what happened as a result of that conversation is an institutionalization that government is backstopping the risks of traders. I mean, isn't that a crazy concept? You and I are traders. We come from a world of managed futures that are essentially traders. No one has backstopped our risk.
Yeah, I don't recall any conversations with trend following managed futures participants where they were. I mean, if you could think of, let's say, I don't know, some of the names that we know, whether it's Tropin or David Harding. These guys, I don't think if they lose 50% because they made the wrong bets, I don't think they're expecting for the government to make them whole.
No. But we have traders and the guys that are running a lot of these banks, particularly John Corzine, we're traders. And essentially, they've just figured out a way to get the government to backstop their risk. Hey, I want to tell you something. From a trader's standpoint, I give them props. I mean, if I could get the government to backstop my risk or bail me out, I'm a genius. So on the one perspective, these guys have got the ideal situation. Now, the downside is it's harming the country, and it benefits a very slim group of people. It doesn't benefit the markets, doesn't benefit the economy in the long run, in my opinion. But that's just me.
Well, I think that the larger issue that comes down to play here, maybe this is the societal issue, is there's plenty of things that are, quote, legal, but it's starting to appear as every day goes by that the ethical and the moral have just disappeared.
Oh, yeah. And I was watching a report this morning on people gaming the mortgage system. So essentially, they'll walk away from their loan. Like if they get in a house and the value of the house drops below the mortgage amount, they just walk away from it. And then they go buy another house because property values have been depressed in the area. So you see people gaming the system all the time. And that's what MF Global really is. If you boil MF Global down, it's about how these guys game the system. They come in and they essentially manipulate the rules, and MF Global's gaming the system, but there's also illegality involved in MF Global.
Well, let me, as we walk away from that, and we'll talk a little managed futures. I guess for me, it still just seems like a big question mark, like how we're at this situation where this is not front page news. And would it be different? Would it be different if it wasn't a name like MF Global that people didn't know about? Would it be different if it was an E-Trade or a Bank of America? I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't be. Maybe it's like people are in some kind of paralysis, this mental paralysis. And everyone's afraid to take an opinion or take a stance or say something or get worked up because I guess maybe we've conditioned the entire country to think that you're either going to get bailed out directly if you're a bank by the Fed, or if you make all the wrong bets, we're going to drop interest rates to zero and try and make you whole that way. I mean, maybe everyone's just, and then we're gonna have the Fed goosing the Dow back up. Maybe that's what we're at. We're at this situation where everyone expects to be saved, and so far, maybe they think they have been.
Fascinating analysis, and it's interesting when I really think MF Global is a point in history, and we're at a unique point. There's there's arguably a debt crisis upon us. We're spending twice the revenue that we generate. Okay, there's a mathematical case to be made that in 3 to 5 years, baby boomers who are retiring are going to draw on government benefits in record numbers. This is a mathematical bubble that's going to occur in 3 to 5 years. And at the same time, there's a likelihood that interest rates could rise. So we're going to have all these strains on government resources at a time where there's a logical case to be made. We're not going to be able to just print money. Remember you and I talked about printing money? You just can't print money forever. And I can see the end of the can kicking occurring. In my opinion, Greece is a warning sign. Greece is the warning. And so we're entering this environment where the government is also backstopping the risk of these large banks who are exposed to sovereign debt in Europe. It's really a fascinating point in history, and right in the middle of it is MF Global, which kind of has all the elements of this story and put into one nice, neat little package.
Well, we've talked about this one risk, I think, which is this kind of this exogenous kind of outside risk that most people don't think about, whether or not the bank's going to steal your money. But I think if we put that aside for a second and we talk about managed futures, the world that you and I essentially occupy, and we've talked about this. I hate the term. It's an industry term it's an industry term that's used for folks that don't know this to describe the broad classification of folks that primarily trade futures. I think the mistake that maybe the term makes is it focuses on the instrument versus the strategy, because as an investor, when you hear the phrase managed futures, your next question should be, okay, what type of managed futures strategy are you talking about? Then you can start to have an interesting conversation. So I think you got to kind of get that figured out though too. But I think as you bring up, and I don't think you were trying to make a prediction. I think you were just saying, look, these are all the things that we can see out there, these minefields that we know are there. But the great thing, and I'll let you comment about this, the great thing from my perspective about the world of managed futures, this trend following style that I write about in trade, is that you don't have to know what's going to happen next. And it's this great hedge against the meteor striking, so to speak, that you can't foresee. These strategies actually give you an opportunity as an investor to be prepared for the next big one. And if you've watched the last dozen or so years, I think everyone's going to agree with us that the next big one is always on the way.
Right. Exactly. And if price persistence occurs during the next big one, which is typically the case with a managed futures trend following strategy, if price persistence occurs, there's a case to be made, just like 2008, that trend followers will experience a positive market environment. And that's really the benefit of trend following and spread arb strategies and vol strategies. And you bring up an interesting point. When you say managed futures to people, they hate that name. They think it's small. They think that the people are small. Well, actually, some of the most successful hedge fund managers are actually managed futures programs. Ray Dalio, Bridgewater. Ray Dalio, Bridgewater understands the different market environments. He knows that a spread trading strategy, for instance, works in a market environment of convergence and divergence. He knows that a trend trading strategy operates in a market environment of price persistence, and he's got the volatility strategies down. That's what makes him so interesting. And then you look at, some of my favorite trend followers are some of yours as well. If you look at guys like Winton, what I like about Winton is he has over 100 algorithms, and he has an algorithm that selects the algorithm to use in the market environment, which I find fascinating. So I'm starting to, the more I talk to some of these trend followers, the more exotic and interesting I'm finding both their algorithms for getting into markets. But what's most interesting to me? And I've always liked risk management. I like to figure out how they're getting out of markets. What's their risk management? How are they controlling that downside deviation? For me, standard deviation to me is not an appropriate measure. I like to look at downside deviation. What happens when things go poorly? That's really how I like to analyze the CTA.
Yeah, because standard deviation penalizes trend followers for upside volatility. Well, upside volatility is a good thing,
Right. There can be individual volatility within these CTAs. There's no question. But when you put them in a portfolio, they're an uncorrelated source of volatility. So here's the big concept, is you want to create a portfolio, an investment portfolio, that is tied to the stock market and economic strength to a certain extent. Then you want to have a smaller piece of that portfolio that is unencumbered from the stock market. So the concept is we want to just have a piece of portfolio that it doesn't matter what the stock market's doing. It doesn't matter what the economy is doing. This piece is designed to operate independent. Now, there's no guarantees about what's going to happen in the future, obviously, and there's risk in all these investments. But the bottom line is what you want to try and achieve is that diversification. And that's real diversification. I think the diversification that's being sold right now isn't diversification because during times of crisis, most assets move to 1 on the correlation chart, meaning they all travel in the same direction, price-wise.
Well, you mentioned having a diversified portfolio with multiple strategies in it. And that's the I think that's the view that gets across to many mainstream investors. I will note though that behind the scenes, when I often have conversations with some of the biggest trend following names around, they've got their whole thing in their program, meaning they're, so I'm not necessarily recommending it, but it is worth pointing out that some of the best traders on the planet actually don't get, they always say, you still hear this, and you could tell me better what the numbers are. What is it? 75 buy and hold stocks and 15 bonds, and then 10 or so managed futures. But I find behind the scenes, you, with the guys, the larger names, it's usually 100% their own cooking.
Yeah, you're correct on traders. I know a lot of traders who have their skin in the game. I've had some accounts of traders, their personal accounts, and I've actually witnessed more aggressive trading in their personal accounts than their public account. That's just my observation.
Oh, I've had that comment to me multiple times when I'll ask guys, and like I said, some of the larger names, maybe they try and deliver to clients 12 to 14% a year in a trend following type strategy, and maybe they don't want to go below 15, 25% drawdown. And then you talk to behind the scenes, they're like, oh yeah, I'll take 50% drawdown on my own account.
Yeah, so that's really a big difference I've noticed between the professional investor who's accustomed to managed futures and let's say maybe a more retail investor, is the professional is willing to take a drawdown. And actually, professional investors understand there's a mathematical logic to a certain degree to maybe enter a position when it's drawn down or enter a CTA during a period of a drawdown. Those are considered volatile strategies, but with the guys who are willing to tolerate some risk, I've seen those strategies provide some interesting results.
So tell me, are you off to a 4th book now? What's the next step? Okay,
well, remember when you and I talked, and we spent more time talking than just that interview. I was all on this concept of an uncorrelated investing book. That's my little sweet spot and my whole market environment thesis. So I wanted to get that out. And then MF Global just exploded in my lap. I have been... How did
you become a trigger man for this? Because you've really been in the middle of this quite a bit. So how did you find yourself in the middle of this?
I didn't ask for it. Let me put it to you that way. I mean, I knew Catulus. Catulus and I knew each other. Catulus and I actually met at a J.P. Morgan party. And I write about this industry, so I kind of know a lot that goes on in the industry. And I think that there was a problem sort of communicating what was happening to the mainstream media to a certain degree.
That problem still exists, by the way.
Well, I think, people think this is such a complicated industry.
Stop.
I understand it like the back of my hand. So sometimes I can be accused of just getting into it too quickly and throwing around the verbiage. But then they came to me with some issues. I mean, the first thing I saw, they showed me this SEC document scandal. And I was just shocked. I mean, essentially, it showed that the way I interpreted it and the way many people have interpreted this is that the SEC withheld material risk disclosure on behalf of Coruscant. I couldn't believe what I had seen. I actually talked to some people at the CFTC. I'm not going to say who. And I was like, guys, I need a reality check here. Please tell me what's going on. And they're like, Mark, yeah, that's how it works. People who are kind of familiar with this industry started to say to me, Mark, here's the real story. You know, there's a fight going on in the CFTC right now, in my opinion, based on speculation, that there's a core group that wants to fight for market integrity. They want to fight, you know, they've always believed in the integrity and the system in the commodity futures markets. And it's kind of funny, like if you talk to some of the old timers at the CFTC, they have a pride of ownership of the commodity market, and they're there to protect. But what's happening, people have told me, is that there's a dismantling. What happened at the SEC is now starting to happen at the CFTC. And there's pushback. You know, the old timers at the CFTC, the people who are defending market integrity, are kind of digging their heels in on this MF Global. And the sort of political level that has no real interest, or no real apparent interest in the commodity markets, is, you know, some people say destroying the commodity markets. That's speculation. I think it can be supported by a number of facts, but that's speculation nonetheless.
You know, you comment somewhat on the internal workings of government offices, the SEC and the CFTC, and you make some positive comments about some people there that may be supportive of doing the right thing. I've got a fairly brutal way of looking at this, though.
Most people don't.
Yeah, my brutal way is this, and I steal the line from the fine author of The Black Swan. If you see fraud and you don't call out fraud, you are a fraud. So in my humble opinion, anybody who sits at the SEC, who sits at the CFTC, and has not yet become a whistleblower, who has not yet told everybody what they know, because, and it's one simple reason, Mark, they're collecting a freaking paycheck, and that's it. If they are doing that, they are a fraud. I don't care if they're a good person that agrees with me and you sitting down at lunch. If they are sitting at those government offices right now, collecting a paycheck and refusing to be a whistleblower because they're collecting a paycheck, that is what's wrong with America, period, in my humble opinion.
I agree with you, okay? But I want to talk about the reality of the situation.
Oh, that's the reality. The reality is if you see fraud and you don't call out fraud, you're a fraud.
Okay, it takes time.
Well, if you're ethical, it doesn't. You know what I'm saying? I know you're being a nice guy, but for these government folks that are not blowing the whistle, I'm not buying the time thing. And I'm not so sure. Do you think that, and I'm not picking on you, but I'm saying, do you think that the account holders in MF Global, who I assume have not yet been made whole, correct?
No.
How long do they have to wait?
Well, depending on the bankruptcy process. I mean, it depends on how this whole thing unfolds.
It's just the whole thing's gross.
I think, it's just taking time. I think what we saw in Congress, where they're calling for a special prosecutor, that was a big move, in my opinion. So I've seen a number of moves in this direction. Don't forget, you're criticizing, or the system is essentially criticizing a former too-big-to-fail bank executive, a former governor of New Jersey, a former senator, the most powerful man to ever walk in the futures and options industry. I mean, that is without dispute. So here the most powerful man to ever grace our industry is being accused of fraudulent behavior. People are going to take their time to make sure that those charges are accurate.
I hear all the superlatives about the guy, but is there anybody in Washington that's not just a jock sniffer?
All I can tell you is my personal experience and what I have seen. I have witnessed people stand up. I have seen that. Now, there is politics in what happens, no doubt about it. But I've seen some reasonably good people who are doing a good job and are making a stand. I think people are making a stand, and it's happening right now. So while just getting this message out, communicating the real story behind MF Global, I think is helpful. I wish that the mainstream media would get this a little more, because it's such a compelling story once it gets out and once people understand it. And you and I I don't know how we're approaching an hour here, Michael, and I still didn't tell you a lot of the story. There's a whole Edith O'Brien back office story. There's a story about what occurred the week of the bankruptcy. There's a story about what occurred before the bankruptcy with this bond offering. So,
well, we'll get together and fill it in again because I know you have to run. But let me ask though. So there's a lot of other little details, but I think you laid it out very clearly in the beginning, kind of the analogy to a bank president basically stealing your money, and you laid that out. And we've talked about some of the slow machinations, hopefully towards justice. So I'm going to leave you with the hard question: when does it end? Can you see a time frame? And when it ends, what do you see the ending being?
Okay, it all depends on how things play themselves out. I'll give you some scenarios. These are let's pretend we're risk managing, gaming a trade here or a CTA investment. There's one path where if essentially the people who want to sweep this under the rug are successful at doing that. That's the mission from day one, is to sweep this under the rug. So if those people are successful, the bankruptcy will drag on and on and on, and 5, 7, 10 years later, we're not going to have the resolution that we wanted. The bankruptcy trustees will have generated hundreds of millions of dollars in fees each that comes right out of the customer's money. So if nothing's done, that's the scenario.
Gotcha.
And then our society goes down a path of who knows what, because who knows what's next that they can take.
Who gets screwed over next really becomes the fear.
Okay. So that's path one. Now there's path two. Path two is the path of this becomes front page news. Okay? Once this becomes front page news, I suggest the wheels of justice are going to turn pretty quickly. Because once people understand what's really happened here and what it really means to them, then they're going to demand some justice. And the people who are standing up for customers right now, those people need to stand up, and they need to be louder, and they need to be more forceful, because we are on the verge of winning this one. In my opinion, justice will be done. The commodity markets and their investor protections will be validated. And we're going to sell uncorrelated investments to everyone, because that's what's needed right now at this moment in history.
Well, Mark, I'm going to agree with you. I'm very optimistic about the uncorrelated investments, the managed futures trend following. I will let you be optimistic about the wheels of justice, hopefully moving towards the right place with this MF Global situation. I think we're going to have a bet over dinner. My feeling is it won't get resolved. It is the tip of the iceberg. And these types of things will continue to happen. When the next meteor happens, more people will get the shank. And so I'll let you take the optimistic side that we'll all get fixed, and I'm going to take the negative side that this is just the tip of the iceberg, and it's going to get worse.
We're going to have to define the parameters of that trade a little bit better. I would, if I could define.
Let's put it this way: I don't think they're ever going to put handcuffs on Corzine.
All right, well, that's the debate inside the industry right now. What you hear inside is, we can get him on civil, and you guys should just be happy that he's going to be charged with civil penalties. And I'm going to, whatever they decide, whatever happens, I'm going to be supportive of it. But I know a lot of people are going to be disappointed if there's not handcuffs. But that's just the reality.
We'll work on ferreting out this bet a little tighter. We'll have to think more about it. But I know you got to run. Listen, I appreciate your time today, and we will connect up soon, Mark.
Sounds good. Take care, Michael.
Take care.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.